The listening section of the TOEFL measures a test taker's ability to comprehend conversations and lectures in English. There will be a conversation and 2 lecture-based passages included in this practice. After listening to each recording, you will then answer a few questions about it. You are allowed to take notes of important details while listening to the recording. You may also use your notes while answering questions to help you figure out answers more accurately. The questions will be narrated. For questions that require replaying of a part of a conversation or lecture, you will see a headset icon beside the direction. This means that you have to wait for the replayed part before answering the question. After you are done answering all the questions, an answers and explanations part will follow for you to check how well you did with the practice and to better understand how an answer to a question is determined.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a housing office employee.
Good morning. How may I be of assistance to you?
Good morning to you, sir. My name is Lisa Carter, and I'm a freshman here at the school. I live in Patterson Hall with 2 other roommates, but there are a couple of problems with our room. So, I'm hoping that you can help me out and solve them.
I'll certainly do my best. In that case, why don't you tell me what's wrong with your dorm?
All right. The first problem is that there is a leak in the roof. We live on the 7th floor of the hall. That's the top floor. And, you remember how we got all that rain a couple of days ago?
Oh yeah, that sure was some storm, wasn't it?
You can say that again. Well, there must still be a lot of water collecting on the roof because parts of our ceiling are wet, and some water is even dripping onto the floor in a few places. We put some buckets in the room to catch the water, but, that's going to cause mold and mildew to grow in our room, and we really don't want that.
Definitely not. Plus, the roof could collapse if there's still a lot of water up there.
Oh, I never even considered that.
All right, I'll make a call and have a work team head to your dorm right away so that they can check it out. This is something that absolutely can't wait. What room did you say that you're in again?
I'm in room 705 in Patterson Hall, and you might have those workers knock on some of the other students' rooms, since I think I heard some other students complaining about water leaking into their rooms as well.
That doesn't sound good at all. All right. Thank you very much for bringing that to my attention.
Sure. Now, as for the second problem...
Second problem?
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, the second problem is that there are ants in our room. And no, before you ask, we don't leave uneaten food lying around on the floor.
Okay, that was the first question I was going to ask you.
I figured as much. But I make sure that we keep our room as clean as possible, so that's why I'm not sure exactly why we have ants. We've got them in one of our closets, and we can sometimes see them on the floor.
That's not good either. I'll have a different person drop by to check out that problem. That should be sometime this afternoon. There's not a third problem, is there?
No, sir, that's it.
Well, that's a relief. All right. Expect to have some visitors within the hour. You're going back to your dorm room now, right? I hope so, because someone needs to be there to let them in. They're not allowed into a room if no one is there.
That's fine. I don't have class today, so I'll go back to my room and stay there until the work teams take care of everything.
Now get ready to answer.
Number 1. What is the first problem that the student discusses? Number 2. What can be inferred about the housing office employee? Number 3. According to the student, Why are there ants in her dormitory room? Number 4. What will the housing office employee probably do next? Number 5. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
And you remember how we got all that rain a couple of days ago?
Oh, yeah, that sure was some storm, wasn't it?
You can say that again.
What does the housing office employee imply when he says this?
That sure was some storm, wasn't it?
Listen to a lecture in an architecture class.
Today I thought we would skip ahead and look at a more modern work of architecture. It's a unique project that is actually going on as we speak. The building is the Sagrada Familia Cathedral, and it's located in Barcelona, Spain. Here you can see a picture of this massive unfinished cathedral that's in the middle of the city's urban landscape. Please note that I said unfinished. You see, construction on the cathedral began in 1882. Yes, that long ago, and is scheduled to be finished in 2026. Maybe. As you may have guessed, the construction of the cathedral has been delayed in the past and will likely continue to be delayed in the future. The key architect was Antoni Gaudi, a Spaniard. He began working on the cathedral in 1883, which was after its foundation had been laid. Gaudi had a grand vision for the cathedral. As you can see here, the cathedral has 3 elaborately designed facades. Most cathedrals only have one. Each of the facades shows an event from the life of Jesus Christ. Gaudi also planned 18 towers. The towers were meant to represent various biblical figures, and they were intended to be anywhere from 115 to 168 meters high. As of now, however, only 8 of the towers have been completed. But take a look at this picture, and notice how they easily dominate the Barcelona skyline. Gaudi also planned to use nature as his guiding force. He believed that straight lines were unnatural since they rarely appear in nature. Instead, he felt that the Sagrada Familia should be designed based on more natural lines. But in order to build the massive structure that he had in mind, Gaudi needed to develop a unique load-bearing system, so he turned to trees for his inspiration.
Trees? What do you mean by that?
Well, take a look here at these slides. He designed these columns that look like what? Like tree trunks, right? Note this column. It's 8-sided at the bottom, gradually moves to 16 sides, then to 32, and finally to 64 sides here. The top practically looks like a circle. Notice how the column spreads out much like the branches of a tree. At the separation point here, he placed designs that look like the knots you might find in tree trunks. From this point, the columns branch up to the cathedral's roof, where they provide enough strength to bear its weight. It's important, I think, to realize that by creating these columns, Gaudi avoided having to use flying buttresses, which are common in most European cathedrals. Throughout the Sagrada Familia, you can see more places where Gaudi was influenced by nature in his designs. For instance, the tops of the towers are based on crystal shapes and plants, such as wheat and lavender. See? And the tall spires are latticed like beehives. Additionally, most of the gargoyle statues are of actual animals, such as lizards, rather than the mythical beasts that you might see at, say, Notre Dame in Paris. You can probably imagine that this project cost a fortune. That's one of the reasons why it has yet to be finished. The only funding it receives comes from individual donors or is collected from tourists who visit the site. But this actually isn't the most serious problem. You see, Gaudi died in 1926, leaving the project bereft of a guiding hand. Fortunately, he had completed several three-dimensional models of his vision before he passed away. This enabled others to work on the cathedral afterward. Still, the project has been plagued by a plethora of problems. For instance, from 1936 to 1939, Barcelona was a center of fighting during the Spanish Civil War, so all work stopped on the cathedral. Fortunately, while many of Gaudi's models were destroyed then, the cathedral wasn't damaged by the fighting. After the war ended, Spain was left too poor, so the project had trouble getting financing for a while. It wasn't until the 1950s that steady work on the cathedral began again. Okay, before I go into more detail on the cathedral, are there any questions? Tina, you have another one?
Well, it's not really a question. It's more of an observation. I'm a little hesitant to say this, but, that cathedral is kind of ugly.
You're not the first to think that, Tina, and you probably won't be the last. In fact, the people of Barcelona have been divided on the Sagrada Familia ever since it first underwent construction. Some consider it to be a monstrous example of bad architecture, while others have embraced it wholeheartedly. As for me, well, I think that Gaudi was a genius, particularly with regard to his adaptation of nature themes. In fact, he is considered a forefather of biometrics, which is the use of nature in engineering. Now, let me show you some more slides, and perhaps I can get some of you to change your opinions on it.
Now get ready to answer.
Number 1. What aspect of the Sagrada Familia Cathedral does the professor mainly discuss? Number 2. How does the professor organize the information about the cathedral's columns that he presents to the class? Number 3. What comparison does the professor make between the Sagrada Familia Cathedral and Notre Dame? Number 4. According to the professor, what happened to the Sagrada Familia Cathedral after the death of Antoni Gaudi? Number 5. What is the professor's opinion of Antoni Gaudi? Number 6. Listen again to part of a lecture. Then answer the question.
Here you can see a picture of this massive unfinished cathedral that's in the middle of the city's urban landscape. Please note that I said unfinished. You see, construction on the cathedral began in 1882. Yes, that long ago. and is scheduled to be finished in 2026. Maybe.
Why does the professor say this?
Please note that I said unfinished.
Listen to a lecture in an economics class.
This is just a reminder to everyone that your paper on the life of an American business person is due next Monday. Some of you still have to tell me who you are going to write about, so please fill me in as soon as possible.
Professor Jackson, can we write about someone who's not American, like Rupert Murdoch?
Actually, I'd like you to stick with Americans, okay? That's the focus of this class, after all. Now, if there are no further questions, let's look at two American businessmen who made their fortunes in the 19th century. I'm referring to Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. Both became billionaires and left legacies of philanthropic endeavors that haven't been equaled since. Carnegie hailed from Scotland and made his fortune in the steel business, while Rockefeller was from the U.S. and became the world's first oil magnate. Both were acknowledged as the richest men in America during their lifetimes. Let's take a glimpse first at Carnegie. He was what we call a self-made man. He never had a formal education, nor did he come from wealth or status. He came to Pennsylvania with his family in 1848 at the age of 13, and he promptly entered the workforce to support his family. He became a telegraph messenger and later an operator. In this job, he made many connections that would serve him well throughout his life. He saved part of his money and made wise investments, mostly in the railway industry, which further increased his fortune. Carnegie made the transition to the steel business during the Civil War, and he earned huge profits from supplying war materials to Union armies. He founded a steel company in 1870 that later became U.S. Steel, the world's largest steel manufacturer. Decades later, Carnegie abruptly retired from business in 1901 and spent the rest of his life establishing foundations, libraries, universities, and other institutions, most of which bear his name even today. John D. Rockefeller, meanwhile, was the world's first billionaire, and some consider him the wealthiest person in history. Like Carnegie, he gave away much of his fortune in his later years after he retired. Also like Carnegie, he never attended college, and he actually had little schooling beyond what he received as a child. Unlike Carnegie, Rockefeller made his fortune in oil. He, his brother, and several partners got into the oil business in Ohio when it first started becoming a commercial enterprise in the 1850s and 1860s. They constructed a refinery near Cleveland during the Civil War. At that time, oil was mainly used for lubrication and for making kerosene for oil lamps. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil, the company that made him most of his riches, in 1870. He was a strict person who barely spent any money, and he ruled his company with an iron will. Through careful planning and, at times, ruthless business practices, 25 years later, Standard Oil became the world's largest oil company. Both Carnegie and Rockefeller, despite their philanthropic activities, came under scrutiny for their business practices. Both were accused of not paying their workers enough and of not sharing their wealth with their employees. These accusations were mostly false, as Carnegie established pension funds for his workers, and Rockefeller made many people who worked for him wealthy thanks to the success of his business. Both men, however, were anti-union, and this led to clashes with workers. But most of the animosity toward them came from people's jealousy that they had achieved great wealth. This jealousy fell more on Rockefeller than on Carnegie. Why? Well, for his entire career, Rockefeller was accused of unfair business practices, of pushing aside competitors, and of ruining many of them in the process. Most of these accusations were at least partially true. Under pressure from various public and business interests, the U.S. government went on the offensive against Standard Oil. In 1911, the government called it a monopoly and broke it up. The many oil companies we have today, such as Exxon and Chevron, are the legacy of this breakup. Today, both men are remembered chiefly for their great wealth and philanthropy. In comparing them, we can note both similarities and differences. Carnegie was the more well-liked of the two by the public, and by the time he died in 1919, most of his fortune had been given away. Rockefeller lived until he was almost 98 years old and died in 1937. He spent the last 40 years of his life in retirement, during which time he also gave away his fortune. Yet it would be safe to say that despite his philanthropy, Rockefeller was hated more than he was loved. Rockefeller often wouldn't stop until he had bought out or crushed a competitor, which gave him a bad reputation. Ironically, some say that Carnegie was really the more ruthless of the two. Let's take a look at some of their deals in detail, and I'll let you decide on that one.
Now get ready to answer.
Number 1. What is the lecture mainly about? Number 2. According to the professor, what kind of businessman was Andrew Carnegie? Number 3. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Professor Jackson, can we write about someone who's not American, like Rupert Murdoch?
Actually, I'd like you to stick with Americans, okay?
What is the purpose of the professor's response?
Actually, I'd like you to stick with Americans, okay?
Number 4. Based on the information from the lecture, do the following sentences refer to Andrew Carnegie or John D. Rockefeller? Put a check mark in the correct box. Number 5. How is the discussion organized? Number 6. What will the professor probably do next?